Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name's Andrew, and today we are going to be going over the log analysis with SIEM with TryHackMe. So learn how SIEM solutions can be used to detect and analyze different types of malicious behavior is what we're going to be talking about today. Now this room is a premium room, so in order to do this room on TryHackMe, you do have to have a subscription. Now, if you haven't decided yet to sub to TryHackMe, maybe this is the room that's going to make that decision, kind of make it happen. Very excited that's the case, and not sponsored, but I'm a huge fan of TryHackMe and their gamified way of learning and breaking into cyber. So let's go ahead and kind of dive in and kind of get started with this. So let's see if I can zoom out a little bit for you guys. I think I was zoomed in. There we go. Awesome. So we are going to, now I've already solved this room, full transparency. So what we're going to be doing is doing a high level walkthrough and kind of getting into more or less the Splunk query, the Splunk, not query language, search processing language, or SPL, that Splunk is known for, and how to read that. Because even when I was going through, the room says it even tells you it takes about 90 minutes. I would say probably took me about 45 to an hour. And that's just understanding how and what you need to search for and run through with your search parameters within Splunk. And that's going to come with time and experience and full transparency as well. Don't be afraid to Google and use ChatGPT. Or if you're, what we're going to go over as well is inside the room, they give you kind of the parameters and other pre-searches within the examples of what they're looking for to find your solutions. So let's go ahead and get started. So learning objectives, we're discovering various data sources that are ingested into a SIEM, understanding the importance of data correlation, learning the value of Windows, Linux, web, and network logs during an investigation, and practicing analysis malicious behavior. So some room prerequisites not required depending on level of experience, but they have their introduction to SIEM, Windows logging capabilities, cyber kill chain, and Sysmon. So once you spin up this lab and get into the attack box, they do give you a to access the Splunk interface. They give you the hyperlink or link to get to the Splunk dashboard where you're going to get into your SIEM. So you can either copy that, or once you actually spin up your box, you can also just copy and paste your IP address right here, and that will take you to the same page. So the first few tasks up until we get to tasks 4 through 6 are all going to be just reading and comprehension. So by reading these parts of this, so going over centralization and going over correlation, that's going to be giving you the explanation of why SIEMs are important and what kind of role they have to play within a security operations center or a SOC environment. So obviously centralization, SIEMs are usually referenced to getting to see all your logs on a single pane of glass, which means rather than having to log into several different instances to pull logs, all of your logs are being ingested into one singular place. So centralization is really nice. So another piece of this is correlation. So correlation is that ability to link or separate events and piece them together like a puzzle. So SIEMs, I think, do a great job at, as we're walking through this scenario, kind of getting to see how and why these events occurred, and initially building out further network discovery activity that we can kind of search upon. So here in that correlation process, you see a pretty good example of obviously the alert being received, receiving our user information, our host information, and then our network information. So we can then kind of build that out to our who, why, when, what, and where, and then documenting that into a report. So first two questions we're going to go over is what process of linking data from multiple sources to identify relationships between individuals events called. And as we mentioned kind of just briefly up on top, that is your correlation. Now, the second part of this is what is the process of collecting and storing log data from multiple streams and sources into a single unified location for easier analysis called, and that's centralization. So once again, bringing all of your logs into a single place where you can get those done and reviewed. All right, log sources overview. So as we mentioned before, SIEMs are where you're going to be sending all of your logs so you can review everything in one single place. And so here we're going to briefly go over a few different type of logs that might be being ingested. So you have your host-based log sources. Things can look for brute force, account manipulation, malicious executables, and unauthorized sensitive information, maybe detection being sent across your environment. We also have our network-based logs, so detection of suspicious external connections on unusual ports, any of our port scanning that we're seeing, or as well as any login attempts or brute forces. Web-based login sources, detection of web shell exploitation, or detection of any SQL injection attempts. Now, as we bring down here, they're also going to the time pitfalls is what they're trying to explain is that just like any kind of tool you get into, when alerts and stuff come in, you can set up a timing of how those alerts show. So I'm here in Mountain Standard Time here in Arizona. So maybe I set up all my instances on Mountain Standard Time. But wait a minute, what if I have a team that's out on the East Coast in maybe North Carolina or Charlotte, and all their alerts come on East Coast time? When we're writing our reports, the times might somewhat look different, but maybe we're talking about the same time. So right now it's 11:08 here in Arizona, but maybe if a case fired over on the East Coast, it'd be 2:08. So if we're writing our summaries and our times look different, that could just kind of pose as something that's confusing when an auditor or maybe a tier 2 or another team starts to read those cases if two team members are referencing different time zones. So that's where we then bring into the aspect of doing UTC time. So UTC or normalized UTC time is either plus 5 p.m. If it's 5 p.m. for you, those same logs might appear as 1 p.m. in Splunk. And it's just a different time zone that then they're talking about kind of figuring out and normalizing, being aware of what time source or time zone you plan on setting up your instance to. So let's move down to our questions. So what is the process of converting logs from different formats into a single format for easier analysis in a SIEM? And that's normalization, log normalization. It was funny when this was initially going, I was like scrolling all the way up looking for it. Then I quickly took a peek at this. I'm like, oh, it was right there above the question. Next one is which host log source can be used to detect execution of a malicious script? Now, if you remember us going through these three up here, we see right here that the detection of malicious executable and script execution attempts can be found with our host-based log sources. So bringing it back down here, our answer for that's going to be a host-based log, or host-based. All right, we're getting into the weeds now into our SIEM here where we're actually going to get to mess around inside Splunk. So the one thing I want to say that's super, super important is when you're going through these questions, first off, the examples they're giving you here are simply just examples. You can't grab these, and then once you get into your instance, you'll see this search and reporting. That's how you're going to navigate over to your Splunk search query bar. So two things real quick. One, if you can see here in the example here, the time is set to all time. So I made the mistake initially as well as setting all time real time, and you'll get 0 results, so don't do that. We want to mirror what they're showing us and go ahead and throw that into all time. But any of these events, if you're trying to play follow along or kind of jump ahead and try to read into these, none of these are going to populate. These are just for practical instances, and we will not see this data inside. But one thing to keep in mind is look at how they're doing after they're identifying the index, which is where the data is going to be inside Splunk. These additional parameters of your search are what's really going to be your key bread and butter to help you find your solutions. So anywho, moving on to Sysmon and WinEvent logs. Ideally, this is talking about how they want to make sure that these are all being installed and configured correctly to make sure they get fed into your SIEM so you actually can read and parse through the data. So obviously, we're looking at something through Sysmon, such as maybe a suspicious process. And we obviously have these wildcards or the starred with the PowerShell and encoded commands because we're doing a wide search looking for things. As we start to find events, we then start to hone in on those queries and okay, well now we're looking for a specific host name. So for this example, they did winhost5. And then we continuously start to go further and further in as we narrow down our searches to find the next pieces of these examples. So with all that in mind, we have all of our system event codes and everything, but now let's actually see if we can find our solutions. So, and I'll go like this. So I try to go along with the questions and not just give everyone the answers. So our first scenario in this is you are a SOC level 1 analyst on shift and you received an alert indicating a suspicious network connection using port 5678 on Win0105 host. Your task is to conduct an investigation and determine whether this activity is suspicious. Now, the first thing it's going to tell us to do is where can we find this information or where this data is. And that right here is going to be inside index equals task 4. So what you could do is simply just do this huge wildcard search and we can go right here into index task 4 and it's going to give us all of our events. Now, once you do your smart mode to make sure these things actually hit, I like to go to verbose because I kind of like to see some additional data if it actually populates. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't. But we're going to start from there. Now, if you remember correctly, now it's asking us for a specific connection on an IP address that connected to 5678. Now, we can simply just go to, see if I can find it here before. We can add in our event code and our host name. Let's hone this down a little bit sooner. So we know the host happened on host 105. So that's why we're looking for that 105. For the event 3 code, if I can remember correctly, going through notes, bear with me. The event 3 code is actually showing us the type of event that's occurring on that host. So if you go back to statistics, let's go back to our smart run. Now adding in right here, this line right here is what I was looking for. So when we do Shift Enter, we'll get us to our second line. We now want to table out the computer name, parent user, parent image, parent command line, image and command line. That's going to give us now some table data that we can actually see. Now, okay, this is the one I want because we're looking for an IP address. So I want my source IP, destination IP. That's going to come along here a little bit later. So that's still an important one to have down. Here we go. So we now have our table data in. We have our index, our event code, and our computer name. Now we're trying to find that answer of, okay, well, what was the IP address that connected to port 5678? Now, there's nothing here on page 1, but let's just go ahead and check on page 2. Or here's where I think we can now go to verbose mode. Head to events. We can go here. 5678. Interesting. Why isn't it showing now? Oh my gosh, that's why. 5678, because we're looking for this one right here. So here we go. 10.10.114.80 is our IP. Now, which process initiated the suspicious connection? So moving that now down here to the left, if we go to this image, we see what initially started this was our SharePoint.exe. Moving right along, what is the MD5 hash of this malicious process from the previous question? Now, there's multiple different ways you can do this. The way that I did this is I went ahead and I Googled and just added in an additional query into the SPL language or I went to ChatGPT and asked it to improve my query to show me the hash. And by doing that, we get our hash right here, which is 770, ends in 9 echo 7 delta 1. Yeah, when in doubt, Google can be your best friendly senior analyst that can help you answer any question if asked correctly. And then what is the name of the scheduled task that was created on the system? Now, same thing. There's tons of different ways you can figure out how this runs. But I went ahead and I also went and updated, and I'll put all these SPLs inside my video notes. That way you guys have these. of just showing how I was able to find these solutions. So I went ahead and I did an image lookup wildcard for scheduled task.exe. And as we do our wildcard search here, we can see what's trying to run here, right here, scheduled task create on logon Office 365 install. And that was all for task 4 on getting through this, on knowing through these logs. Now, keep in mind, if you've never used Splunk before, and SPL is this your first time messing around with all the different tables and the indexes, totally fine. This is 100% doable by simple Google asking and also looking things up, or even prompting ChatGPT, Gemini, choose whatever AI of your language choice you like to do, on providing it part of maybe the initial query of what you're trying to find, and then asking it saying, hey, look, I'm trying to find this process running. Can you help me enhance this query to make it better? And that's how I was able to get these all completed and able to get these kind of spun out so I could find those specific tasks. All right, jumping into Linux logs. So as I mentioned before, the most important thing you got to consider with these is the index.linux here is not the correct index. But the information here after is really beneficial, because by looking at these alone to go into your additional queries for SPL can navigate you to the solution here for this Linux one. So let's keep moving right along. And as we found on this next one, so these are talking about authentication logs. So we're now looking for possible brute force attempts. We're looking into maybe sudo commands that were executed and confirming or finding if there's any type of maybe accounts created, if there were any kind of scheduled task or any other processes made, or failed login attempts that we can now document and kind of put more into our case. So let's cool down here to our questions. So what was the time of the remote SSH creation? And I guess I should first read what our task is. So for this portion of it, you are a SOC analyst level 1 on a shift and have received an alert indicating possible persistence through the creation of a new remote SSH user on an Ubuntu server. Your task is to dive into logs and determine exactly what happened on this system. And for this, our index we're going to be looking into is index equals task 5. Let's copy this over. So same thing, we hit our wildcard and slowly start pivoting through this, but this is going to kind of still probably take a while. So let's kind of slow down on that and see if we can find a little bit more of a thing that we should be looking for. And what I ended up doing is I wanted to look for specifically the auth logs and any type of sudo or su commands, and I wanted to sort that by time. So let's hit that search real quick. And boom. So this one gives us 13 events. So nice and kind of narrowed down. Let me span this over a little bit. So we start going through these times. It's asking us specifically for this one for a year, month, day, and then our time, which is 6 digits. So for this one, I went ahead and started looking and reading all these specific timelines that, okay, well, when were these being ran and when did they run and execute? So the one that caught my eye was right here. We see a session open for user root for Jack Brown. And I want to say if that's our 50, so 09, 52, 57 was the initial first SSH creation that we saw. So that's that one. Let's keep moving down. Which user successfully escalated their privilege to root prior to the action from the first question? So if we can go right from there, we see that this was done by Jack Brown. So Jack Brown is, I think, the only username we see within here, and then everything else is correlated to root. So with that being said, our next part of that is Jack Brown. Which IP address did this user from the previous question successfully log in to the system? Now, if I'm not mistaken, I want to say we can grab that information also from this query itself. I'm double checking. Let me go in here and drop this down. Okay, I think I ran one other query for this one. So for this one, If we get out of here and just do our search for this and hit enter. Oh, you know what? I think I remember how I did this one. So for this one, so since we know this was SSH and they were SSHing into, I went to process SSHD. And here we can see, there we go. We can see the password and everyone being accessed by this 10.14.94.82. And I think that's the only IP we see reference this. There we go. So that was 10.14.90.42. Perfect. Moving right along. How many failed login attempts occurred prior to the successful login? So keep in mind, as I mentioned, so when you're going through this room, the reason why I think this took 90 minutes is because every time you're trying to find refined information on these logs, unless you're familiar with SPL, the SPL language, there's going to be a lot of Google dorking to figure out, okay, well, what do I need to find? How do I need to actually do this search table? And what am I actually looking for once I actually get through these logs? So that's one thing that took me, I think, probably the most time on this room itself was I'm fairly good with my SPL language, but sometimes it still takes me some time to correlate what I want to do for the table and how I want to pivot things out and review the data. So that's always something important to kind of consider and keep in mind. So awesome. So anywho, and this keeps scrolling up. Let's go down here. Okay, so how many failed login attempts occurred prior to the successful login? So we see here that these were all accepted. Then let's see how many failed ones happened. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, the one thing that this kind of took me for a second to figure out is because we think our answer is 5 because, hey, Andy, it happened 5 times before we see our 4 accepted. But if we kind of look more further into this, I want to say we see one of these being the attempt to log into the user account, which the user account I don't think is correlated to the root login. So we can subtract that, and what we're actually looking for is 4. So 4 is the answer, reference how many failed logins we are looking for to get into our successful attempt into that connection. So last but not least, which port is it the persistence mechanism configured to connect to? And the way I found this one, I had to do a source type and look for specific. This one also probably took me about 20 minutes. So we're obviously our index is always going to be the index equals task 5. And your source type is what's always going to possibly change, and then same thing for your processes. So what I wanted to look for first was, okay, well, let's look for any kind of cron processes to see if we can see anything different happening across our logins. So, and as we do that, we can see, if I can find it right here, we see this source connect for a different IP address. So we're seeing the 10.10.33.31, and they're wanting it connect to that port 7654. So obviously, since we only have 2 events here when we start to look for any kind of process cron jobs, we can see that our answer for that port it's going to be configuring to connect to is port 7654. All right, moving right along. So here we go into the web application logs, which for this one, I thought this one actually took me little to no time. I'd probably say under 5 to 10 minutes. And was actually fairly straightforward to find. You're pretty much only really need to go into one log and hit up one query to find your solution of what you're looking for. So, but we're looking for web log sources. So almost every organization has its own website and therefore web server running in it. Logs from those web servers are collected from Apache, Nginx, and other resources, and most useful for analysis is for access logs. When you can detect requests in web resources, these logs often contain signs of malicious activity such as scanning, DDoS attempts, various web-based attacks, and web shells. In addition, error logs can provide valuable insight, helping you understand possible failures or issues. So, as I keep harping on before, when we're looking for anything within this box in this room specifically, index is going to be different, but these methods and these additional tables after the fact are going to be huge to help you find the data you need. And these images that they show you will give you the aspects of what this is actually going to show you. So this will render a domain, so domain under brute force attack, your client IP, so your attacker IP, user agent or the brute force utility. So here we see that they're using Hydra. The URL path or URI path, so the target logon page, number of attempts it happened, and then the response status code that occurred. So as I mentioned before, don't worry about these parameters or queries because these aren't going to show up into your index or into your Splunk query. These are just for examples. So we see here on this top example, the brute force activity. We see here possible web shell activity, and then we go over DDoS activity. So we now get to our practice scenario, and you are a SOC analyst level 1 on a shift where you've received an alert indicating a spike in activity on the organization's web server. Your task is to dive into the logs and determine exactly what happened. And here we have our next index, which is index task 6. So let's go ahead and just drop that in. Cool. We have over 1K event logs. And so let's see what our first question is asking us to find. So what URL path has the highest number of requests? So this one, as I mentioned, is pretty quick and easy to find. If you go right over here to your interesting fields, and we simply scroll down here to URL or URI, here we can look for our count, and we see our highest count is the WP login.php. So we can simply just click on that, and we'll leave that there for now because that's going to give us a lot of good information here come down the road. So that answer is our /WP tac login.php. So which IP address was the source of this activity? So right here, we should see 135. Let's see if I can go in here a little bit more because I want to say, there we go. Client IP was 10.10.243.134. So that was going to be the source of the activity just by simply going into this drop down and then looking into that IP address. How can the activity be classified? So this one probably would help to have a little bit more context of, okay, well, what does WP login.php do? And this is something I think I simply just Googled. And by Googling that, let's see if I can pull this up real fast on a separate screen to show you guys. So WP login.php is a core file in WordPress installation that handles the login and authentication process for users accessing a WordPress administration area. So when I see this type of activity coming across my network, if it's specifically being used for login possibly, so if we're seeing over 900 different attempts to get into this, likely this is going to be a brute force attack of someone trying to bypass or get into your accounts by just brute forcing that password. And if we go into that aspect of it with that little bit of information and Googling, brute force is our next solution. So what tool did the threat actor use? Now, this one also, once again, like I said, this is all your solutions for this can all be found by simply just going into the index and then this URI web login.php. We can scroll down here to our user agent and we can see that this is being done by wpscan.com. So that is going to be a tool that's being used against this site that we're seeing these attacks coming from. So if we simply do our WP scan, that's going to get us our answer. And in conclusion, we wrap that up, and that's pretty much the tail end of this story on this machine. And great job. We've completed the room. You've now gained a solid understanding of the key log sources commonly found in a SIEM platform and the value they provided during analysis. Explored the value of a SIEM during log analysis, learned how Splunk queries can be used to detect malicious behaviors, gained an introduction to the process of log correlation and normalization, and more exciting challenges await us next. Great work. So great time with this one. Shout out to our creators here. So TryHackMe, Tim Taylor, and Krotovolb, I want to say. So room was just created about 5 days ago, so it's relatively fresh. Like I said, 90 minutes is the estimated time it says on this room. I'd say, depending on level of expertise, that's relatively probably a solid time given. Those that have been inside Splunk and are really familiar with SPL and really know how to dive through logs, you can probably knock this room out within anywhere probably from 15 to 20 minutes tops, depending on speed and how everything logs up for you. But yeah, hopefully this kind of helped. Hopefully that walkthrough was helpful. I'd say very high level, but just wanted to kind of walk through and kind of just go through some of the isms and the ahas that kind of stumped me getting through some of these questions. But really hope you enjoyed the video. And as always, I'll catch you on the next channel video. Have a good one, everybody.